Hey, curious minds, get ready for mind-blowing facts about animals, science, and more. From surprising talents to bizarre discoveries, this video is packed with fun you won't believe. Sit back, relax, and let's dive into the unexpected.
During World War II, the Allies knew that successfully invading Nazi-occupied France required more than just military strength. They needed deception. This led to Operation Fortitude, a large-scale ruse designed to convince the Germans that the main Allied invasion would take place at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy, where the real D-Day landings were planned. The operation was part of a broader deception strategy called Operation Bodyguard, which aimed to mislead the German High Command about the time, location, and strength of the invasion forces. By tricking the enemy into defending the wrong area, the Allies could reduce resistance in Normandy, giving them a better chance at establishing a foothold in Europe. One of the most remarkable aspects of Operation Fortitude was the use of an entirely fake army, known as the 1st US Army Group, FUSEC. This fictional force, supposedly led by General George S. Patton, consisted of inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, and even fake landing craft positioned in southeastern England near Dover. The British even went so far as to create phony radio traffic mimicking what a real army would transmit, and they staged troop movements to make it appear as though a major invasion force was gathering. German reconnaissance aircraft that managed to fly over the area saw what looked like a massive military build-up, reinforcing the deception. A key figure in this operation was Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spanish double agent known as Garbo by the British. Pujol had infiltrated German intelligence and convinced them he was a loyal Nazi spy while secretly working for the Allies. Throughout the build-up to D-Day, he fed the Germans carefully crafted misinformation, making them believe that the Normandy landings were just a distraction and that the real attack would come later at Pas-de-Calais. Even after the D-Day invasion began on June 6, 1944, he continued to persuade the Germans to keep their forces in Calais, expecting another assault. This delayed their ability to send reinforcements to Normandy, giving the Allies crucial time to establish themselves. The success of Operation Fortitude had a profound impact on the outcome of the war. Because of the deception, Hitler held back several divisions, including some of his most experienced troops, expecting a second invasion at Calais that never came. This strategic miscalculation allowed the Allies to push inland from Normandy with far less resistance than they would have faced otherwise. The combination of physical deception, like inflatable tanks and fake bases, electronic deception such as false radio chatter, and human deception, like Pujol's misinformation, made Operation Fortitude one of the most successful military ruses in history. It serves as a testament to the power of intelligence, deception, and psychological warfare in shaping the course of history.
During the height of the Cold War, the CIA explored increasingly bizarre methods of espionage, leading to one of the strangest intelligence projects in history, Acoustic Kitty. The idea was to turn ordinary house cats into covert listening devices by surgically implanting tiny microphones and radio transmitters inside their bodies. Since cats were common in urban environments and could move about unnoticed, the CIA believed they could use them to eavesdrop on Soviet officials without raising suspicion. The project involved inserting a microphone in the cat's ear, a radio transmitter at the base of its skull, and a wire antenna woven into its tail. The program, which reportedly cost millions of dollars, involved extensive research into cat behavior. The CIA hired animal behaviorists to train the cats to move on command, a task that proved far more difficult than anticipated. Unlike dogs, cats are naturally independent and uninterested in following instructions. Handlers struggled to get them to follow a straight path or stay focused on a specific target. Despite these setbacks, the agency pressed forward, convinced that a well-trained feline agent could infiltrate Soviet embassies or government buildings undetected. The first live field test was a complete disaster. The CIA released their specially modified cat near a Soviet compound in Washington, D.C., hoping it would approach a group of Soviet diplomats and pick up their conversation. However, within seconds of being let loose, the cat wandered into the street and was immediately run over by a taxi. Years of research and an enormous budget were wasted in an instant. The failure highlighted not only the difficulty of training cats for espionage, but also the sheer unpredictability of using live animals for such missions. Following this catastrophe, the CIA ultimately abandoned the project, concluding that cats were simply too unreliable to be used as spies. Documents later declassified in the early 2000s confirmed that the agency deemed the experiment a failure, though they learned valuable lessons about animal behavior and electronic implants. While Acoustic Kitty never became a viable espionage tool, it remains one of the most bizarre and ambitious covert operations in intelligence history, a true testament to the extremes of Cold War innovation.
When the Eiffel Tower was first constructed for the 1889 Exposition Universelle, or World's Fair in Paris, it was never meant to be a permanent structure. Designed by Gustave Eiffel and his company, the tower was built as a temporary showcase of French engineering, meant to stand for only 20 years before being dismantled in 1909. Many prominent artists and intellectuals at the time, including writer Guy de Maupassant, criticized the tower as an eyesore, believing it would ruin the Parisian skyline. The city had originally planned to tear it down once the permit for its construction expired. However, the tower's fate took a dramatic turn due to advancements in wireless telegraphy. Gustave Eiffel, recognizing the potential of the tower for communication purposes, funded experiments to install a radio antenna at the top. By the early 1900s, the French military saw the value of using the Eiffel Tower as a radio transmission station, which allowed them to intercept enemy messages and strengthen national security. This technological significance saved the tower from demolition and secured its place as a lasting monument. During World War I, the Eiffel Tower played a critical role in intercepting German radio communications, particularly helping to jam enemy signals during the Battle of the Marne in 1914. By the time its original 20-year lease was up, the tower had become too valuable for strategic reasons to be dismantled. As radio technology continued to advance, the Eiffel Tower remained an essential communication hub, solidifying its status as a permanent part of the Parisian landscape. Today, the Eiffel Tower is one of the most iconic landmarks in the world, drawing millions of visitors each year. What was once considered a temporary structure destined for demolition has instead become an enduring symbol of France. The decision to keep the tower not only preserved an architectural masterpiece, but also demonstrated how innovation can transform something once deemed useless into a national treasure.
During the Prohibition era, from 1920 to 1933 in the United States, the federal government took extreme measures to enforce the ban on alcohol. One of the most shocking actions was the deliberate poisoning of industrial alcohol supplies. Since legal alcohol production was banned, many people turned to bootleggers to obtain liquor. However, much of this illegal alcohol came from industrial sources, alcohol used in paints, solvents, fuels and other commercial products, which criminals would steal and attempt to distill into drinkable liquor. To combat this, the government ordered manufacturers to denature industrial alcohol by adding toxic chemicals, making it unfit for human consumption. The poisoning program intensified under President Calvin Coolidge, with the US Treasury Department working alongside chemists to develop stronger, deadlier formulas. The altered alcohol often contained methanol, also known as wood alcohol, benzene and formaldehyde, substances that can cause blindness, organ failure and death. The government's hope was that these chemicals would deter people from drinking bootleg liquor, but instead, they led to thousands of casualties. Estimates suggest that by the time Prohibition ended in 1933, at least 10,000 people had died as a direct result of consuming poisoned alcohol, while many more were left permanently blind or severely ill. Despite these horrifying consequences, the federal government refused to halt the poisoning program. Officials argued that people knew the risks of drinking bootleg alcohol and that the responsibility lay with those who chose to break the law. However, doctors and public health advocates condemned the practice, calling it a cruel and inhumane form of law enforcement. Newspapers reported on the rising death toll, sparking outrage among the public. The policy ultimately did little to curb illegal drinking as people continued to seek out alcohol despite the dangers. When Prohibition was repealed in 1933 with the passage of the 21st Amendment, the government finally abandoned the poisoning program and legal alcohol production resumed. The era remains one of the most controversial chapters in US history, highlighting the unintended and often disastrous consequences of extreme government policies. What was meant to deter alcohol consumption instead led to mass poisoning, proving that prohibition measures can sometimes cause more harm than good.
Before the invention of rubber erasers, people had a surprisingly simple yet effective way to remove pencil marks: breadcrumbs. In the 18th century and earlier, writers and artists would use, often slightly damp, to rub away graphite from paper. The soft, absorbent texture of bread made it an effective tool for lifting pencil marks without damaging the paper. However, breadcrumbs had some drawbacks. Easily leave behind bits of residue and could attract pests if not properly discarded. The transition from bread to rubber erasers happened by accident in 1770, when Edward Nairn, an English engineer, discovered that natural rubber, then called India rubber, could effectively erase pencil marks. According to historical accounts, Nairn had mistakenly picked up a piece of rubber instead of bread and found that it worked much better. Recognizing its potential, he began selling rubber erasers commercially, marking the beginning of a new era in writing and drawing tools. However, early rubber erasers had their own problems. They degraded quickly, had a strong odor, and would sometimes rot over time. A major breakthrough came when scientists discovered that vulcanization, a process developed by Charles Goodyear in 1839, could make rubber more durable and resistant to wear. This process involved heating rubber with sulfur, strengthening its structure and making it much longer lasting. With this improvement, rubber erasers became the standard tool for correcting pencil marks, replacing breadcrumbs entirely. By the late 19th century, erasers were widely available and even integrated into the tops of pencils, making corrections more convenient than ever. Today, erasers come in many forms, including vinyl, plastic and kneaded rubber erasers used by artists. While breadcrumbs are now just a historical curiosity, they serve as a fascinating reminder of how people improvised before modern inventions. The simple act of erasing mistakes, something we take for granted today, has evolved significantly from its humble origins in a loaf of bread.
The guillotine, often associated with the French Revolution, remained France's official method of execution long after the revolution ended. Surprisingly, it was still in use until 1977. Invented in the late 18th century, the guillotine was designed to be a more humane and efficient means of capital punishment. It replaced earlier methods like hanging, which were often slow and painful. The device became infamous during the Reign of Terror from 1793 to 1794, when thousands, including King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, were executed publicly in front of massive crowds. Despite its revolutionary origins, the guillotine remained France's preferred method of execution for nearly 2 centuries. By the 20th century, many countries had abandoned public executions, but France continued to use the guillotine. While executions were no longer public after 1939, the guillotine was still employed in French prisons. The last person to be executed by guillotine in France was Hamida Jandoubi, a Tunisian immigrant convicted of murder. On September 10, 1977, he was beheaded at Beaumet's prison in Marseille. Jandoubi's execution marked the final use of the guillotine in France and in the Western world. The continued use of the guillotine in the 1970s was increasingly controversial. By this time, many European nations had abolished the death penalty, and the idea of using such an old and gruesome method of execution seemed outdated. The execution of Jandoubi sparked public debate about whether France should maintain capital punishment at all. This debate, along with shifting political attitudes and growing opposition to the death penalty, led to its abolition in France in 1981 under President François Mitterrand. Today, the guillotine is seen as a symbol of France's revolutionary past, but its long history as an official execution method is often overlooked. Though many associate it with the 18th and 19th centuries, the fact that it was still in use during the late 20th century is a chilling reminder of how slow legal and cultural changes can be. The last use of the guillotine happened just 4 years before Star Wars: A New Hope premiered, highlighting how recently France was still carrying out executions using this historic device.
One of the most fascinating stories from the life of Julius Caesar is the time he was kidnapped by pirates and actually demanded they increase his ransom because he believed he was worth more. This unusual event occurred in 75 BCE, when a young Caesar, then about 25 years old, was traveling across the Aegean Sea. While en route to study rhetoric in Rhodes, he was captured by a group of Cilician pirates, who were notorious for raiding ships and holding wealthy Romans for ransom. They initially demanded 20 talents of silver, roughly 600 kilograms, or 1,300 pounds of silver, but Caesar laughed at the amount, claiming he was worth at least 50 talents, more than twice their demand. The pirates, amused by Caesar's confidence and arrogance, agreed to the higher ransom and allowed him to send his men to raise the money. While waiting for the ransom to be paid, Caesar lived among the pirates for 38 days, treating them not as captors but as subordinates. He joked with them, wrote poetry, and even participated in their games and exercises. He often told them, in a half-serious manner, that when he was free, he would return to hunt them down and crucify them all. The pirates, thinking he was joking, laughed at his boldness. Once the ransom was paid and Caesar was released, he immediately began planning his revenge. He raised a fleet, hunted down the very same pirates who had captured him, and swiftly defeated them. Instead of simply punishing them, Caesar personally ensured they were crucified, just as he had promised. However, in a rare act of mercy, he ordered their throats slit first, sparing them from the prolonged agony of crucifixion. This act demonstrated both his ruthless efficiency and his ability to command respect and fear, even at a young age. This episode in Caesar's life is a perfect example of his charisma, ambition, and strategic thinking, qualities that would later make him one of the most powerful figures in Roman history. Rather than being humiliated by his capture, he turned it into a power move, proving his dominance and reinforcing his reputation. It was a glimpse into the leadership style that would eventually lead him to become dictator of Rome, forever altering the course of history.
One of the most bizarre events in papal history occurred in 897 CE when Pope Stephen VI ordered the corpse of his predecessor, Pope Formosus, to be exhumed and put on trial in what became known as the Cadaver Synod, or Synodus Horrenda in Latin. Formosus had been pope from 891 to 896 CE, but after his death his political enemies, particularly Stephen VI, sought to discredit his legacy and erase his influence. To achieve this, Stephen had Formosus's rotting corpse dug up, dressed in papal robes, and placed on a throne in the Lateran Basilica to stand trial. Since Formosus was, of course, unable to speak, a deacon was assigned to act as his defense attorney, though the trial was anything but fair. Pope Stephen VI, driven by personal and political grievances, accused the dead pope of illegally ascending to the papacy, violating church law and committing perjury. During the surreal proceedings, Stephen ranted and mocked the corpse, treating it as if it were alive. Unsurprisingly, Formosus was found guilty, and as punishment, his papal vestments were stripped, his 3 blessing fingers were cut off, and his body was dragged through the streets of Rome before being tossed into the Tiber River. The spectacle horrified many in Rome, and Stephen VI's obsession with humiliating a dead man backfired. His behavior was seen as so excessive that it led to public outrage, and within a year he was imprisoned and later strangled to death by his own political enemies. Formosus's body was eventually recovered from the river, reburied with honor, and his papacy was posthumously reinstated by later popes, nullifying the absurd ruling of the Cadaver Synod. The event remains one of the most macabre and infamous moments in church history, demonstrating the extreme political rivalries of the medieval papacy. It also highlights how far some leaders were willing to go to maintain power, even if it meant putting a rotting corpse on trial for crimes he supposedly committed in life.
The oldest known Yo Mama joke dates back to around 1500 BCE, making it over 3,500 years old. It was discovered on a Babylonian cuneiform tablet that contained a collection of proverbs, riddles and humour written in Akkadian, one of the ancient languages of Mesopotamia. While much of the text has faded over time, scholars identified one of the jokes as a clear insult about someone's mother, proving that trash talk and humour have been around for millennia. Unfortunately, the full joke is incomplete due to the damage to the tablet, but researchers have reconstructed parts of it. What remains suggests that it was likely a crude, sarcastic remark about a mother's behaviour or status, much like the modern Yo Mama jokes that poke fun at someone's intelligence, size or actions. This discovery suggests that ancient people, just like today, enjoyed playful insults and wordplay, showing that humour has remained a constant part of human culture. The Babylonian joke is one of the earliest examples of written humour, but it wasn't the only one. Other ancient civilizations, such as the Egyptians and Greeks, also recorded jokes, riddles and comedic sayings, many of which wouldn't seem out of place in today's world. The fact that a mother-based insult was included in this collection shows that joking about family members was just as entertaining back then as it is now. While we may never know the exact wording of this ancient joke, its existence proves that Yo Mama humour is timeless. It's a reminder that no matter the era, people have always loved to tease, joke and laugh at each other's expense.
One of the most bizarre and fascinating animal survival stories in history is that of Mike the Headless Chicken, a bird that lived for 18 months without a head. On September 10, 1945, a farmer named Lloyd Olson from Fruita, Colorado, attempted to butcher a 5-month-old Wyandotte rooster for dinner. However, when he swung his axe, he missed the jugular vein and a portion of the brainstem, leaving Mike's brainstem and one ear intact. To Olson's shock, Mike did not die. Instead, he stood up, walked around, and even attempted to preen himself as if nothing had happened. Realizing that the chicken was still alive, Olson decided to take care of him instead of finishing the job. He started feeding Mike a mixture of milk and water with an eyedropper, along with small grains of food that he placed directly into the open esophagus. Incredibly, Mike continued to thrive, gaining weight and behaving like a normal chicken, trying to peck for food, attempting to crow, though he couldn't make a sound, and even perching on a roost. News of the headless chicken that refused to die quickly spread, and Olson took Mike on the road, showcasing him in sideshows and exhibitions across the United States. Mike became a national sensation, earning his owner as much as $4,500 per month at the height of his fame, which is equivalent to tens of thousands of dollars today. He was featured in magazines like Time and Life, and people travelled from all over to see the miraculous bird in person. Scientists were fascinated by how Mike had survived, with experts concluding that because a chicken's brainstem controls basic reflexes, Mike could still function despite losing his head. Mike's unusual life finally came to an end in March 1947 when he choked to death in a motel room in Phoenix, Arizona. Olson had accidentally left behind the eyedropper used to clear Mike's throat, and by the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. Despite his death, Mike the Headless Chicken remains a legend, and the town of Fruita still honors him with an annual Mike the Headless Chicken Festival, celebrating his unlikely survival and place in history. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed these incredible facts. If you found them fascinating, there's so much more to discover. Stay tuned for our next video, where we uncover even more mind-blowing facts about the world around you. You won't believe what's next.